A local woman named Doreen had been driving through town with her two daughters when something unusual caught her attention. As she passed a busy road, she spotted a woman running frantically across traffic, barefoot and clearly distressed. The woman dashed toward a nearby restaurant and began pulling desperately at the door, which had not yet opened for the day. Realizing something was terribly wrong, she helped the woman into her car and contacted 911 without hesitation. The young woman quickly gave police a detailed description, not only of her attacker but of the car itself. Thanks to this phone call, the case of Brooke Wilberger, who disappeared in broad daylight, gained new momentum. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. 19-year-old Brooke Wilberger was a bright, spirited young woman living in Oregon, where she had grown up in a large and deeply connected family. As the fifth of 6 children, Brooke had always stood out, not just because of her natural beauty and striking green eyes, but because of her warmth, integrity, and unwavering drive. Her siblings often described her as the glue that held everyone together. She was dependable, honest, and full of quiet determination. Brooke had a strong sense of purpose from a young age. Although she struggled with speech as a child, only beginning to speak around the age of 4, she worked tirelessly to overcome that challenge. This personal journey profoundly influenced her career goals. Inspired by the help she had received, Brooke set her sights on becoming a speech pathologist. She dreamed of helping others find their voice the way she had found hers. Her family was deeply religious, devoted members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Faith was not just a part of their weekly routine, it shaped their values, their bonds, and their outlook on life. Brooke, like her family, lived her beliefs with sincerity. That devotion extended to her high school sweetheart Justin, one of her oldest friends. The two began dating when Brooke was 16, and their relationship was rooted in years of friendship, mutual respect, and shared values. They were known to their community as a picture of young love, kind, grounded, and spiritually united. When Justin left on a 2-year church mission to Venezuela, Brooke remained incredibly supportive. She wrote to him regularly and continued to live a life filled with purpose and discipline. She enrolled at Brigham Young University in Utah, not just because of its strong academic reputation, but because it was one of the best institutions for speech pathology, a field she felt passionately about. Her freshman year at BYU went well. She adjusted to college life quickly, making friends, studying hard, and staying active in campus life. Brooke wasn't the type to seek attention, but people naturally gravitated toward her calm, sincere nature. Brooke also loved being active. She had a genuine passion for sports, particularly basketball, snowboarding, and long-distance running. Whether on the court, the slopes, or the track, she thrived on pushing herself and staying engaged with the world around her. Despite her soft-spoken demeanor, she had a steel-like core when it came to standing up for what was right. Her family often said that Brooke wasn't afraid to speak out when something didn't sit well with her, and she lived by a strong moral compass. As the summer of 2004 rolled in, Brooke returned home after her freshman year. Like many college students, she wanted to earn a little extra money during the break. Her older sister, Stephanie, helped her secure a part-time job at Oak Park Apartments in Corvallis, Oregon, about a 30-minute drive from their family home. Stephanie lived at the apartment complex with her husband, where they also served as on-site managers. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. Brooke could stay with them during the work week, earn a paycheck, and still have time to enjoy her summer. Brooke embraced the job with her usual diligence. She performed small maintenance and cleaning tasks around the property, happy to contribute and stay busy. Stephanie and Brooke made plans to have lunch together on Monday, May 24th, 2004. It was a typical late spring morning in Corvallis, mildly warm with the sky lightly overcast. That morning, around 10 a.m., Stephanie glanced out the window of her apartment and saw Brooke near one of the buildings, filling a plastic bucket with water. She was gathering cleaning supplies and preparing to scrub down some of the outdoor light fixtures, a task she had taken on willingly. Everything seemed completely normal. But as midday approached, Stephanie became distracted with the usual chaos of managing kids and getting lunch ready. It wasn't until after 1 p.m. that she suddenly realized Brooke hadn't come in for lunch, and she was now very late. At first, Stephanie thought maybe her sister had gotten sidetracked, perhaps chatting with a resident or finishing up a task. With a laugh, she told her children, "All right, let's go send out a search party," as she headed outside to look for her. As she walked through the complex, Stephanie expected to find Brooke nearby. But what she saw instead chilled her. Near one of the lampposts stood the bucket of water Brooke had filled hours earlier. Next to it were her cleaning rags and supplies. Nothing had been moved. Most concerning of all were Brooke's flip-flops, sitting awkwardly on the ground. One of them had its toe strap completely torn, and both were smeared with mud. It didn't look like someone had simply left them behind. Stephanie felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Something was very wrong. Rushing back, she called her husband. The two of them quickly began searching the area more urgently. Time passed in a blur, and by 3 p.m., they had discovered that Brooke's phone, purse, and wallet were still inside her locked car. No sign of her anywhere. The scene was too alarming to ignore. They knew they had to call 911. Police responded quickly. Given the circumstances, the abandoned cleaning gear, the damaged footwear, law enforcement didn't hesitate to take the case seriously from the outset. Lieutenant Ron Noble of the Corvallis Police Department later commented, "Normally, adults have the right to come and go, and we might wait 24 hours before launching a search. But in this case, it was clear that something wasn't right from the start." Brooke was not the kind of young woman who would just disappear without a word. She was responsible, deeply connected to her family, and had plans. She wasn't impulsive. Her disappearance felt sudden, out of character, and deeply suspicious. A couple of residents mentioned hearing something strange around 10:30 that morning, a scuffle or loud noise, but no one had seen anything clearly. The lack of witnesses only deepened the mystery. Within hours, the community had mobilized. Police officers began canvassing the area, going door to door at the apartment complex. Detectives quickly realized that there were over 2,000 registered offenders living in the broader region, an overwhelming number that made their investigation feel even more daunting. But they were determined. Every possible lead was worth pursuing. Investigators naturally reached out to Brooke's boyfriend, Justin, though he was thousands of miles away, deep into his missionary work in Venezuela. His whereabouts were easily confirmed, and there was no reason to believe he had any involvement. But that didn't stop him from being devastated. Marriage had always been part of their plans. In their letters, Brooke often spoke about wanting a big family, children, a home filled with laughter, and a future built on faith and love. Justin had always imagined the summer unfolding very differently. But the moment he received the news about Brooke, his childhood friend and girlfriend, his world began to crumble. It felt unreal. He couldn't believe that this was now his reality. One moment, everything felt stable and hopeful. The next, the girl he planned to marry had vanished without a trace. When authorities first reached out to him, it was clear that the call was a formality. He was never seriously considered a suspect. Police Captain Jonathan Sassaman later reflected on the pressure surrounding the early stages of the investigation. "It was extraordinarily stressful," he admitted during a media briefing. "You had a community looking for answers. You had families on edge, watching their daughters more closely. You had a town afraid to breathe. Everyone was asking, 'Is this random? Is someone else going to be next?' The unknowns were chilling, and the urgency to find answers increased with every passing hour. Brooke's disappearance quickly snowballed into one of Oregon's most highly publicized missing persons cases in recent memory. Media coverage grew rapidly as the days unfolded. What started as a local concern spread across state lines, capturing national attention. Hundreds of volunteers offered to help, with search parties scouring wooded areas, neighborhoods, trails, and campus buildings. Flyers were posted everywhere, from gas stations to grocery stores to university bulletin boards. There was a collective energy behind finding Brooke. A young woman everyone described as kind, genuine, and full of promise. The FBI joined the investigation not long after the local authorities determined the case might involve interstate activity or a larger risk to public safety. Tips flooded in from across Oregon and beyond, with people claiming they had seen someone who looked like Brooke. Some swore they had spotted her in towns miles away. Others reported behavior they thought seemed suspicious. Investigators were overwhelmed, but determined to chase down every credible lead. Then, a few days into the investigation, a tip arrived that led authorities down an unexpected and troubling path. A man named Sunku Kim, aged 30, emerged as a person of interest. Kim was an intensely private individual who lived in a rural part of Oregon with his parents, roughly 80 miles from Corvallis, where Brooke had last been seen. His name came up in connection to a string of unusual incidents. Kim had already been under surveillance for unrelated reasons. He had recently been charged with burglary, specifically breaking into university dormitories to steal personal items, particularly clothing. One of the locations he had targeted was Oregon State University, located only a short distance from Oak Park Apartments, where Brooke had been working the day. She vanished. When investigators searched Kim's residence, what they found shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Inside his bedroom, they uncovered thousands of personal garments, all allegedly stolen. The scale of the discovery suggested a pattern that had gone on for years undetected. To detectives, the troubling nature of Kim's behavior raised red flags. There was growing concern that this kind of obsessive theft could potentially escalate into something far more serious. Nearly a week after Brooke went missing, in the early hours before sunrise, law enforcement executed a full search warrant on Kim's family home. The operation was thorough and tense. Authorities seized computers, electronics, and hard drives. As they combed through his digital files, they came across an alarming document titled OSU.doc, clearly referring to Oregon State University. The file, believed to have been created after Brooke's disappearance, read like a dark instruction manual. Though it never mentioned Brooke by name, the contents outlined how to plan a crime and avoid detection. It discussed what types of clothing to wear, what items to bring, how to behave to deflect suspicion, and what to avoid when moving around college campuses. While deeply disturbing, the contents of the file did not include any direct reference to Brooke or evidence tying Kim to her case. Nonetheless, the parallels were hard to ignore, and Kim remained under scrutiny for several days. Eventually, Kim was cleared. Data recovered from his devices, time-stamped transactions, surveillance footage, and verified store receipts placed him elsewhere at the critical time. His father confirmed he had been shopping with Kim on the morning Brooke disappeared, and the timeline matched perfectly. Law enforcement ruled him out as a suspect. Still, Kim did not escape the consequences of his previous actions. He would go on to serve 7 years in prison on multiple charges, including burglary. Later, his parents would file a lawsuit against the state and local authorities, claiming that the police raid on their home had been excessive and traumatizing. After prolonged negotiations, they reached a settlement of just over $300,000. Despite closing that lead, Brooke's case remained frustratingly unsolved. Days turned into weeks. Weeks quietly turned into a full month. For her family, each sunrise brought a glimmer of hope. But each sunset ended with no answers. The weight of uncertainty grew heavier. As time passed, the statistical reality became harder to ignore. Investigators understood the grim truth. The longer a case remains unsolved, the less likely it is to have a hopeful resolution. But still, they pressed on. There was one detail that continued to interest authorities: a possible vehicle sighting. Several people had reported seeing a dark green minivan, believed to be from the late 1990s, possibly a 1997 model. The van had been spotted near Oregon State University around the time Brooke disappeared. Its presence was odd, and the behavior of the driver raised concerns. One caller, a man named Brian, had phoned 911 days earlier to report the van driving recklessly. University staff member Bob later told investigators he had seen the vehicle parked in a campus lot. He recalled seeing the driver engaging with a female student in a way that unsettled her enough to immediately report the incident. Another student shared her own unsettling experience. She told detectives that the van had pulled up abruptly in front of her, and the man inside asked for directions. What alarmed her was that he exited the vehicle and opened one of the rear doors while still talking. She didn't wait around to find out more. She turned and walked away as quickly as possible. These accounts were concerning. While the identity of the driver remained unknown, the description of the vehicle and its odd presence in the area made it a focal point of the ongoing investigation. Flyers were updated to include information about the van, and tips regarding similar vehicles were prioritized. Still, time dragged on. Summer gave way to fall. The once large search parties began to shrink. Volunteers returned to work or school. News crews moved on to other stories. But the Wilberger family continued to hope. Then, in November, 6 months after Brooke's disappearance, something unexpected happened. 1,400 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A local woman named Doreen had been driving through town with her 2 daughters when something unusual caught her attention. As she passed a busy road, she spotted a woman running frantically across traffic, barefoot and clearly distressed. The woman dashed toward a nearby restaurant and began pulling desperately at the door, which had not yet opened for the day. Sensing the urgency of the situation, Doreen didn't hesitate. She pulled her car over and quickly approached the woman. After briefly speaking to her and recognizing her distress, she guided the woman into her car and tried to calm her down. She was a 22-year-old foreign exchange student, and she was alone, walking through a quiet area when something terrifying happened. Tearfully, she later described how a man had suddenly grabbed her from behind. She hadn't seen him coming, and the fear she felt in that instant was overwhelming. The man was described as tall, physically broad, and white, with a shaved head and a thick beard. She barely had time to comprehend what was happening. The car was a 2-door model, and what stood out most, aside from its bold green exterior, was the unusual red floral pattern decorating the interior. There was also a stuffed toy hanging near the window, an odd and hauntingly childlike touch in an otherwise terrifying situation. The man drove her to an apartment complex where he briefly left the car and went into one of the units. In what can only be described as a miracle of timing and courage, the woman managed to break free. She didn't stop to think. She just ran. Barefoot, panicked, and determined to survive. She ran straight into the path of Dara, a local mother who was out driving with her children. Seeing the distressed woman sprinting across the road and tugging frantically at a restaurant door, Dara immediately pulled over. Realizing something was terribly wrong, she helped the woman into her car and contacted 911 without hesitation. The young woman quickly gave police a detailed description, not only of her attacker, but of the car itself. Thanks to her clear memory and the vehicle's unusually specific characteristics, authorities were able to act swiftly. Within hours, the suspect was identified as Joel Patrick Courtney, a 38-year-old man living in a nearby Albuquerque suburb. He was known to police and had a checkered history that stretched across multiple states. Officers located Joel just a few blocks away, still inside the distinctive green car. Digging deeper into Joel's background, authorities discovered a troubling past. He was no stranger to law enforcement. He had been convicted in 1991 and had compiled a long list of criminal charges over the years, theft and assault. He had lived in numerous states, Alaska, Florida, New Mexico, Oregon, picking up odd jobs and frequently relocating. Though Joel was married and the father of 3 children, his personal life was far from stable. His wife, Rosie, had recently filed for a restraining order against him. Their relationship had been tumultuous, marked by patterns of conflict and instability. Joel's sister, Dana, later gave a revealing interview about his early years. She explained that Joel had once been considered highly intelligent, with a genius-level IQ as a child. There were expectations that he might do something significant in life. But by the age of 11, he had already started experimenting with harmful substances. That early exposure spiraled quickly into more serious issues. He dropped out of school and was in and out of juvenile facilities for a variety of offenses before he was even an adult. For a while, things seemed to stabilize, particularly when Joel met Rosie at 23 and started a family. Dina said she genuinely believed at one point that he might turn his life around. But unfortunately, those hopes were short-lived. After several years, Joel returned to a destructive lifestyle. The situation gradually worsened, erratic behavior. At the time of his arrest in Albuquerque, Joel was once again spiraling. He was reportedly drinking heavily and had become increasingly volatile. After being formally charged with kidnapping and battery, Joel was interviewed by local detectives. One investigator, in particular, found it difficult to ignore the similarities between this case and the now high-profile disappearance of Brooke Wilberger. The two young women shared certain physical similarities, and both had been targeted in broad daylight, in areas near universities. The methods used also bore eerie resemblances. Following a hunch, that investigator picked up the phone and called the task force working on the Wilberger case back in Oregon. He asked a simple but powerful question. "Have you heard of Joel Courtney?" To their shock, investigators on Brooke's case quickly confirmed that Joel had, in fact, been in the Corvallis, Oregon area around the exact time Brooke went missing. He had been there with his family on a trip. The information immediately shifted the focus of the investigation. Joel was no longer just a suspect in a New Mexico assault. He was now being looked at in connection with one of Oregon's most devastating unsolved cases. Back in Albuquerque, when Rosie called Joel's sister Dina to inform her of the arrest, Dina's reaction was haunting. As she hung up the phone, she turned to her husband and said, almost under her breath, "Do you think he could be involved with Brooke Wilberger's case? It's impossible to even think it's possible." She later admitted that even though she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud at the time, something in her gut told her Joel knew more than he was letting on. What followed was a months-long investigation, during which authorities in both states worked together to uncover the truth. They painstakingly pieced together Joel's timeline, retraced his steps, and searched for any physical evidence that could tie him to Brooke's disappearance. One of the most critical moments came when they located the green minivan Joel had been driving during that time, a vehicle that had been repeatedly reported in the early days of the Wilberger investigation. Witnesses had described a green minivan acting suspiciously near Oregon State University, and this matched Joel's known vehicle from the trip. The forensic team conducted a thorough and meticulous analysis of the vehicle. They dismantled the interior, collected fibers, swabbed surfaces, and tested every crevice for trace evidence. After weeks of careful lab work, the results were clear and devastating. In the spring of 2005, DNA tests confirmed that Brooke Wilberger's DNA was found inside the vehicle. Even more telling, strands of her blonde hair were discovered in a hairband, which had been tucked away inside one of Joel's personal bags. The evidence was not just circumstantial, it was scientific and definitive. With these findings in hand, the case finally reached a courtroom. On Friday, July the 29th, the Benton County Grand Jury reviewed all the evidence presented. After hours of deliberation, they returned with a 19-count indictment against Joel Patrick Courtney, who was 39 years old. The charges were serious. Under Oregon law, this charge carries a maximum penalty of death. However, because Joel was already incarcerated in New Mexico and facing charges there, legal complexities around extradition made it unclear whether he would ever return to Oregon to face trial for Brooke's case. One of the most heartbreaking contrasts between these two cases is the difference in outcomes. In New Mexico, the young woman managed to escape, survive, and report what happened. Her bravery not only saved her own life, but helped reopen the door to justice for Brooke. But if the gravity of the charges impacted Joel in any meaningful way, he didn't show it. According to court officers and fellow inmates, Joel reportedly laughed through the afternoon after being served the paperwork. Prosecutors later said he openly mocked the situation, sharing jokes with others in his unit. It was a chilling reminder of just how little remorse he seemed to feel. Despite continuing to deny knowing anything about Brooke, claiming he had never even heard her name, his family saw through the facade. During one of the few visits he had with his mother while incarcerated, She asked him directly, "Did you kill her?" Joel didn't answer immediately. He paused for a moment, long enough for the weight of the question to settle, before responding cryptically, "They'll never hold me accountable for this." That disturbing exchange added to the growing sense that Joel not only knew exactly what had happened to Brooke, but that he was holding the truth as a kind of leverage, waiting for the right moment to use it. In January 2007, Joel attempted to delay his legal fate by claiming that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. His attorneys argued that his long history of and mental health struggles rendered him incompetent. But after a detailed evaluation by medical professionals, the court ruled that Joel was indeed mentally sound and capable of understanding the charges against him. For Brooke's mother, Cammie Wilberger, that decision was an emotional moment she would never forget. She later described how she had been driving when the call came in. Upon hearing that Joel would stand trial, she pulled her car over and danced in joy, a brief, powerful release after years of tension. Cammie later admitted she had nearly fallen into despair, imagining the possibility that he might escape justice on a technicality. That day, hope returned. However, before Oregon authorities could move forward with the charges related to Brooke's disappearance, Joel had to first face justice in New Mexico, where he was been sentenced to 18 years in prison. At his sentencing hearing in New Mexico, Joel showed no respect for the courtroom. He interrupted proceedings, made inappropriate comments, and appeared to treat the entire process as if it were a nuisance. But behind the scenes, police and prosecutors weren't just discouraged, they were more determined than ever. As one officer later put it, "The more he showed us who he really was, the more it lit a fire in us. He wasn't going to get away with this. He was going to tell us where Brooke was, one way or another." Nearly 5 years had passed since Brooke had last been seen. Joel's trial in Oregon was set for early 2010, and it was shaping up to be one of the most closely followed criminal trials in the state's history. Given the overwhelming evidence, Joel faced the possibility of the death penalty, and prosecutors were preparing to seek it. But Joel, ever calculating, decided to play his final card. He began to signal that he might be willing to cooperate, but only if the terms were right. Over the course of several months, Joel had refused to speak candidly about Brooke's fate. Instead, he played a slow, manipulative game, knowing that he alone held the answers the Wilberger family had been pleading for. It wasn't until his life behind bars became increasingly difficult, including frequent beatings from other inmates and being denied his usual medications for anxiety, that Joel began to crack. Seeking a transfer to a different facility and a reprieve he was experiencing, Joel finally agreed to make a deal. He told prosecutors he wanted to serve the rest of his New Mexico sentence closer to family, then be allowed to transfer back to Oregon afterward, where he would not face the death penalty. He also wanted assurances that the most severe punishment would be taken off the table. The legal teams debated, weighed the options, and eventually agreed. The priority, they determined, was to bring Brooke, something her family had waited more than 5 long years for. With those conditions met, Joel changed his plea to guilty and agreed to fully cooperate. At long last, he told investigators what they had long suspected. He had taken Brooke's life. He also finally revealed the location of her, information that had been cruelly withheld for years. Authorities in Oregon quickly mobilized. After following Joel's directions, search teams located the site. It was a remote, private property far from plain view. Joel had hidden Brooke beneath a fallen tree, ensuring the area blended naturally into the surrounding environment. The discovery brought grief and relief in equal measure. Identification was made through dental records, and heartbreakingly, Brooke's mother was able to recognize her daughter from a personal item left behind. Brooke was still wearing the silver watch Cammie had given her for Christmas, a gift she had selected carefully, never expecting that it would one day become the clue confirming her daughter's identity. That small watch, worn with love, helped provide closure after years of uncertainty. Even in the face of such tragedy, the Wilberger family chose grace over hatred. Cammie spoke to the media saying, "We are thankful that justice has been served. He will have no opportunity for parole, and now we can move forward." Her words resonated across the state as an example of strength, forgiveness, and the human capacity to heal, even after unimaginable loss. In court, Joel provided a disturbing but necessary account of the events. He confessed to driving around Corvallis that fateful day, specifically looking for a woman alone. He had even attempted to abduct 2 other women, the same individuals who had bravely come forward with their stories earlier in the investigation. He was now formally charged in those cases as well. Joel explained that when he saw Brooke, he decided to change tactics. She was working quietly, cleaning lights near the apartment complex. He pretended to be a delivery driver, approaching her under the guise of needing directions. As she neared his van, then everything happened. Though he admitted to taking her, Joel claimed that he hadn't intended to end her life. He said the situation spiraled out of control, but investigators and prosecutors alike found little sincerity in that explanation. His actions before, during, and after the crime suggested a level of premeditation and awareness that contradicted his statements. To this day, specific details about where and how the crime occurred have been kept private, out of respect for the family. Authorities say it happened in the place deep in the wooded wilderness of Benton County, within the coastal range of Western Oregon. It was a discovery that sent ripples through not only Brooke's hometown of Veneta and the city of Corvallis, but also through the small, tight-knit communities scattered across that peaceful stretch of countryside. Tucked away from main roads and obscured by layers of natural overgrowth, it was a spot rarely visited by anyone aside from the occasional hiker, hunter, or local farmer. For many who lived nearby, the revelation that something so dark had unfolded so close to home was nothing short of chilling. But as the town slowly began processing the news, there was one thing that remained unchanged and deeply disturbing to everyone following the case. Joel Patrick Courtney, the man who had finally confessed to the crime, had never once expressed remorse. Over the entire legal process, through multiple hearings, evaluations, and public statements, Joel never apologized to Brooke's family. He never offered words of regret, empathy, or acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. Even when given the chance to speak directly to the Wilbergers in court, he remained emotionless. His silence, in the eyes of many, spoke volumes. It became painfully clear that he had no intention of taking personal responsibility beyond what served his own legal interests. His cooperation came not from guilt, but from a calculated desire to improve his own circumstances, specifically to avoid harsher punishment and relocate to a different prison facility. In the end, Joel Courtney was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will spend the rest of his days behind bars, never again allowed to walk freely. The ruling ensured that he would not be able to manipulate the system any further or inflict pain on anyone else. For Brooke's loved ones, and for the many people who came to know her story and grieve alongside them, the sentence brought a complicated mixture of relief and sorrow.